Services Staff Officer of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge Forest for the past 7 years in Dillon. And she worked as planning chief for Rainbow Gathering in 2013. She is a California girl, third generation, from Bakersfield, so it's cool here for her. She got a bachelor's from Cal Poly, a master's from UCD. Public services includes recreation, wilderness, trails, engineering, and land. But of course, she was involved with the Rainbow. She got volunteered to be a part of the national volunteer Rainbow. Anyway, Patty Bates. And she kept her clothes on.
Tell me something that was unique, and I did not take my clothes off during the Rainbow Gatherings. One of the few who didn't. So I brought some pictures and just kind of tell you the story of how things kind of happened and rolled out. I think a lot of you kind of experienced it here in town. You got to do some bopping back and forth. I apologize for that. So the history of the Rainbow Gathering, if you haven't been familiar with the Rainbows, they have been gathering for 41 years now. They started kind of right after the Vietnam War. Oh, cool, thanks. They started right after the Vietnam War. They started in Colorado for their first. What they do is they have chosen to meet nationally on a national forest somewhere in the United States. Last year they were in Tennessee. The year before they were in Washington. This year they were in Montana. They're a very loose-knit organization. They are not an organization. They're basically a group of folks. It's kind of like if you went camping up in the national forest with 9,000 of your best friends. That's how they describe themselves. They have taken the Forest Service to court numerous times, and they have won, and they have the right to gather peacefully on the National Forest from the First Amendment, to gather under the First Amendment for expression of their views and their religious freedoms. Over the past years, the gatherings have been happening. There's been between 10,000 and up to 28,000 people that converge into the gathering sites. They come from all walks of life. I was kind of describing it during lunch today. There are some vehicles out there, and you've probably seen them in town. You wonder how they even made it to Dillon and out to Jackson. And we also had $500,000 motorhomes out there and Mercedes. So it's a broad mixture of folks that show up for it. A lot of the gatherers come just for the 4 days around the 4th of July. Some of them actually live from gathering to gathering. They're literally homeless people that just go from gathering to gathering. The message of the Rainbows is that basically any non-violent person that has a belly button is welcome at the gathering. And so that's what we end up with.
May I ask what's with the belly button?
I think that's to show that you're human. So humans are allowed.
They don't want aliens.
Yeah. So they do choose to go on national forest for their national gatherings. They have regional gatherings where they go to other public lands like the Yellowknife, but their national gathering is always on a national forest. It is, again, kind of started as that counter hippie culture back in the late 70s. They are a non-commercial group who gather under their First Amendment rights. That's kind of what their history is.
Can I just have a question before I forget? How do they take their case to court if they don't have an organization? I mean, who took it to court?
There's individual lawyers that represent individual members. So there's an individual who, in the past, the Forest Service has issued citations against Rainbows for the gathering. They have tried to find responsible people and say you have to have a special use permit. And they have had a lawyer represent an individual. It's not a class action, it's not a group, but they represent it, and the Forest Service has basically been told this is a guaranteed right under the First Amendment, and you will allow them to gather. So what we try to do is we manage it under an operating plan, and I can talk about that in a little bit, but just how we try to manage it. Okay, thank you. Sure. Yeah, and any questions you guys have, please, because this is not really well scripted. So the way that this unorganized groups work is they do have a council of elders that come together. Again, the elders do not represent the Rainbows, but they get together every spring in a council to talk about where they want to have their national gathering. This year they were up at Racetrack, right near Racetrack Campground on the forest, outside of Deer Lodge. They got together and kind of argued back and forth. We knew they were coming to Montana. They decide that each year, kind of the state they're going to, but we didn't know where in the state they were going to. When they had their spring gathering, it was June 7th through 9th. They left their spring council with no decision of where they were going. So it's now June 10th. Nobody knows where these guys are coming, but they're all coming to Montana somewhere. They didn't reach consensus until June 16th. And when that happened, we found out basically the same way the Rainbows did, which is through all of their internet sites, their public postings, their Facebook page, and they said, we're going to Saginaw Meadow. Everybody get there starting June 17th. And this is what happened at Saginaw Meadow. So before the Forest Service could even get out there, before we even knew they were coming, there was over 500 people that had showed up out in the meadow. I think a lot of you were here in 2000. This is where they've been before. They knew what they wanted to do, and they started setting things up. Normally within the Forest Service, if you have a group gathering of more than 75 people, you have to have a special use permit from us. And in that special use permit, we make one person responsible for what the group is doing out there. We don't have that option with the Rainbows, and instead we manage them through an operating plan. And the operating plan, we talk about public health, we talk about safety, we try to minimize the impacts to natural resources, we talk about the rehab work they need to do, we talk about fire prevention, and our operating plan with the Rainbows this year is about 5 pages long, and then there's a whole bunch of other special orders that the forest put in place. We closed roads, we closed areas to parking, we prohibited nudity on public roads, and we required dogs being on leash. So we added another level of Forest Service requirements to this, but that's how we manage them. When the Rainbows come, they basically set up a village, and at the time, the elders within the Rainbows are getting up in age. You realize this is their 41st year of gathering, and we initially thought this was going to be kind of their final hurrah, that we would see somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people show up. And that's kind of what we were bracing ourselves for. So when they do set up, they bring, again, a whole village to this. There are kitchens set up, there are information booths set up, there is a place called Kitty Village where they take care of all the children and have day-long kitty activities. They have a supply unit, they have a whole breadth of healthcare facilities that they offer. So all this just kind of grows, and it grows exponentially during the time that they're here. We were fortunate in that this county has experienced this before, so there's a lot of knowledge in terms of how to work with the Rainbows. We established what we call Unified Command, and that's where we share responsibility between all the various agencies. And involved in our Unified Command this year was Forest Service, Beaverhead County, and many aspects of Beaverhead County, from the sanitarian to the county sheriff, to fire, to EMS, City of Dillon, Beaverhead Hospital, and Montana Mental Health kind of all came together, and we would meet every morning to talk about law enforcement and talk about health and safety issues, and then every other day to bring everybody to the table and say, what do we need to do to kind of help get ahead of what's going on out there. This is kind of an overview of how we were organized. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see, where am I? This is me right here. So it really just kind of merged between the Forest Service and the county and the state organization. The state of Montana was very involved with this. Highway Patrol was here, DES was here, Public Health was here. So a whole group of folks all kind of came together working on how we're going to manage the gathering itself. The primary emphasis within the Forest Service at this point in time has been law enforcement. And so what we call our incident commander, the person that oversees this, was our assistant special agent in charge from the Forest Service. We actually had, I'm trying to think, 28 law enforcement officers from the Forest Service come from across the country to help with managing this event. So we try to stay kind of on the peripheral of the event, but we had mounted patrol out there, we had ATVs out there, and we had regular Forest Service law enforcement on foot patrol. Oops, one back, maybe. I skipped one, sorry. Good job. A lot of folks have asked what this costs to manage it, and we don't know. We don't have a figure. It takes us a couple months for all the the bills to come in, we can tell you, we know what the current hospital unpaid bill is. You know, we know what the county sheriff and the city police have done in terms of their budgets. For the Forest Service, at our national office in law enforcement, they set aside up to $400,000 to pay to manage the law enforcement of this. It doesn't come off the forest, it doesn't come off of our regular programs. It's just something we have to deal with each year. So there's $400,000 set aside to deal with the law enforcement part of this. The emphasis of our law enforcement officers is primarily on safety. And we had a closeout this morning, and we're considering it a success because of all the folks that worked on the event. There was no accidents and no injuries. And that's a good day for us when we can send everybody home safe. There were, from the Forest Service side, 840 incidents, what we call incidents. We recorded through our law enforcement officers something that wasn't right. That included 394 incident reports where we write up where they weren't following the operating plan, where they might have parked illegally, those kind of things. They issued 385 warning notices. We issued 49 violation notices, which are basically tickets they have to pay, and they also did 9 arrests and warrants that were served for a variety of misdemeanor as well as felony incidents. So I think the message that we received this year is the flavor of the gathering and the gathering participants has changed in recent years from the 1970s when the hippies used to kind of show up and have a good day out there. It was a different crowd that came this year. So.
How so?
Well, so when you enter Rainbow Camp, the first thing you see is what's called A Camp. And A stands for alcohol. So the rainbows themselves feel that alcohol and drugs do not belong within the gathering site. And so, when you go to where the gathering site is, it's actually a half mile to a mile walk into the main campsite. And one of the ideas is that you're not going to lug your beer a mile back and forth every day. But we had a variety of folks that were right there at the entrance. I don't think they were sober the entire time. They were just bad people out there this year. And there's a different flavor of folks. When I consider and say that we had 800 incidents, that's a big toll on law enforcement. There was a lot that the county sheriff had to deal with. There was the highway patrol issued, I think, 600 moving violations just during that 10-day period that they were managing just that little stretch around Jackson. So it's a different crowd that's being attracted right now. So I can't explain why, I just know it's different. So, did you have a question? No? Okay. So the rainbows will tell us, and they'll tell you that they're environmentally friendly, that they gather because they love Mother Earth, and that's what they actually do on July 4th, is they pray for world peace, and they pray to take care of Mother Earth. So they do a lot of their own policing within the gathering. These are their gathering rules in terms of taking care of things. They throw bridges down over every creek crossing out there. They try to follow what we put in the operating plan. And their goal when they leave is that we won't be able to tell that they've been there. But you can tell they've been there. There was approximately 1,500 cars out at Saginaw Meadows. And if you've been out on the Skinner Meadow Road, you know where Saginaw Meadow takes off, there's really not adequate parking for 1,500 cars. The real emphasis this year was to keep the cars off the road, and that was for safety. So, if anything had happened with fire, with ambulance needs, there's only really one way to get in and out of that gathering spot. So there were designated parking spots where the cars were kind of all pushed off to. They will be out there hand raking and fluffing and reseeding that area probably for another month. And also probably over the next month we'll be dealing with abandoned cars. At this point, there's still folks out there. We can't tell if the cars are abandoned or not. So.
Who are they? You say they will be out there raking. The Forest Service, Public Service dollars, or rainbows?
Rainbows.
Yeah.
So rainbows have designated, again, unofficially, because they're not an organization, but 2 or 3 of the camps, known as Goat Camp and Fat Kids and Worthless, are all staying, and they will be there for a month. And they're actually right now, we've been monitoring them for the past 3 days, they're actually doing a pretty good job. They really are out there picking everything up and rehabbing everything.
Tony, are a lot of these groups, the transient homeless people that are staying out there to help clean up?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if there's folks that can actually stay on the forest for 6 weeks to deal with all the rehab, they probably might not have a full-time job, but I don't know. Yeah, so.
They did have places they could take baths, right?
So this is their water system. They do set up an extensive water system. This is only part of what got run out there. They tap into natural springs, then they run them in through a triple filter system. Both the county health and the state health were testing the water pretty much on a regular basis. You know, the answers aren't anything surprising. You know, there's E. coli and coliform in our water, you know, at the source. There's cows out there, there's dogs, there's everything. When they got through the triple filtering, the water was safe to drink. I don't know of any bath water that was set up. What I saw used as the bath was the Big Hole River. I didn't see any showers set up.
Much bathing going on.
There was not much, what I saw, there was not much bathing going on. So, but they do have an extensive water system that they set up. I mean, literally thousands of feet of hose go in to set up this water system feeding all the various kitchens.
Now, do they have semis that they move all this stuff in with?
We had one, what do you call those vans? Serva something? We had one van show up that was at, but you saw the buses rolling through town. So
U-Haul or?
no, it's a big, it's the kind you see deliver food to restaurants. I'm sorry, service something. Anyway, there was one commercial truck that showed up out there, which they're not allowed to have a commercial truck on National Forest, so was told to leave. So a lot of it, people were bringing things. There was vans, there was buses, there was U-Hauls, there was motorhomes that haul all this stuff in. They had about 20 kitchens set up. There's different flavors of kitchen depending on what you want to have. There's vegetarian kitchens, there's hot kitchens, there's Asian kitchens, there's coffee shops, there was a chai latte place set up. So there's all these various kitchens that cater to whatever folks want.
Do they get paid to eat in those kitchens? Or, I mean, the people that run the kitchens charge?
No, there's no money exchange at all. They have what's called a magic hat that follows the feather. So the magic hat is passed around for folks to donate to.
I see.
So there's no exchange of funds whatsoever.
A lot of bartering going on?
There is a lot of bartering. There's a place called the Trade Circle, and it looks kind of like what's bigger than Dillon's Farmer Market. It just gets set up, and you lay out a blanket and whatever you have to trade, and you're in or out, like your button, let's trade. So there's a tremendous amount of bartering and trading that happens.
And do any of these kitchens need health permits or anything like
They do not need health permits. They were inspected by the state health folks.
And they're made out of rock and mud? Is that-
Everything they make out there is made from what they find on the site. So I'll have another site on this. This is their baking ovens that they make out of mud. Everything else is all poles tied together with string, and everything else as they build these things.
And do they bring the poles in, or are you giving permits to cut the forest down? Or
For the folks that were cutting poles, they did have to come in and buy a pole permit. For anybody who wanted firewood, burn in your campfire, it's just like you if you went out. I mean, we have so much firewood on this forest at this point, with half the forest dead. So this is an example of kind of how they set their kitchen up. This is called the Lovin' Oven, and this is where their bakery is. So they will basically just kind of, it takes about 4 or 5 days for them to build this. They'll bring in just kind of a steel drum, surround it with mud, and then they have a crew that just sits there with a crosscut saw and feeds wood into it, and they do all their baking out of this. So the day we were there, the bread racks themselves aren't full right now. Again, you can see they're built out of sticks and rocks and twine. And this is the ovens once they were all done and designed. But they were baking 800 pizzas that night out of the Lovin' ovens. So they've got a lot of logistical abilities that they bring to when they put this whole thing together. Sanitation is another concern that everyone has, and the way they handle their kitchens and their washing is kind of a 3-part thing. Soap, water, and then another water bath with a little bit of bleach in it. They were pretty good on all of that. There are lots of references throughout the camps to wash your hands, keep the camp clean. But the way that we deal with human waste is is the old kind of military way. We tell them to build a slit trench. And some of them are nicer and more comfortable than other slit trenches. There's a slit trench per 100 person. It needs to be at least 2 feet deep. They have lime on site, and they're required to cover their cat bowl when it gets within a foot of the surface, and then they build another one. So, excuse me. One of the big impacts they've had in this community has been to the local healthcare system and the hospital, and that's been a real difference from past gatherings. And nobody really knows why, other than it's just a different crowd. But they do have their own medical units out there. They're called the CALM, which is the Center for Alternative Living Medicine. They actually have, again, these are folks who come out for the weekend and are involved with being a rainbow in their background life. They had an emergency room doctor out there, an RN, they had a midwife, and they had about 4 EMTs that staff these places. So they do a lot of their own medical care. They also have everything out there. They had a witch doctor out there. They had, someone where you can meditate. They had an acupuncturist. They had, an herbalist. So whatever kind of medical services you needed, they provided. The bad news is there was a lot of folks that ended up at Barrett Hospital that never should have ended up in Barrett Hospital. And I think the last count I heard this morning, I don't know, Marty, what was it, like 94 cases? I think that had come into the hospital. Some of them repeat visitors, some of them for psychotic mental things, and some just because they went to the emergency room. So that was a real downside of this whole thing.
Patty, did you guys see any babies born this year?
There was no babies born. Previously there have been.
Yeah.
So there are no babies so far. This is the main purpose. This is the main gathering and their prayer circle on the 4th of July. They come together. It's silent for the morning. At 12 o'clock they all join hands, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you'll connect the circle between all 3 slides, you'll kind of figure out there's about 5,000 to 6,000 people out there holding hands in silence, praying for world peace and Mother Earth. This is what it's all about, and that's kind of the height of the gathering is what happens on that 4th of July. Things really changed for us this year. Again, at the beginning I told you we thought we'd see between 20 and 30,000 people because this was the big last hurrah. And so what we have here is we kind of track the numbers from what happened in 2000 to what happened last year, or this year, last week. In 2000 there was 23,000 people that converged on Saginaw Meadows. Our high this past week was about 9,700, 9,800, somewhere around there. So not even half as many people as we've seen in previous years. And there's probably a lot of reasons for it. One, they made their decisions so late. We told you we didn't find out until June 17th. And that was really much later than they've ever announced their gathering site. Two, there was a lot of folks that didn't want to come back to Saginaw because they felt that after 13 years that the meadow hadn't healed and that it would be more impacted if they came back a second year. And then the third piece is there is a lot of, the rainbows are getting up in age. And Saginaw's at 7,000 feet elevation, and there's folks that weren't comfortable being at that elevation. So we saw a significant decline in the numbers compared to what we've historically seen. What happens at this point? There are still rainbows out there. This loosely organized, nobody assigned group is taking care of all the rehab. They will be out there probably for at least another month, cleaning up and taking care of the site. We have met between the city, the county, the state, and the Forest Service to do what we call an after-action review. We held that meeting this morning, kind of a lessons learned. So when we hand this off to the next community and state and forest that inherits this thing, maybe they'll learn, that what we learned going through this. We still need to figure out really how to deal with the impacts to the local services. That is a significant change from anything that's happened in the past. And we'll be monitoring the site for additional rehab work throughout the summer. There's still a couple more. This is not this year, just so you know. But this kind of gives you a flavor of how the rainbows operate. They did not bring out a dumpster to start with. And their perspective is they're going to do as much recycling as they can. And they don't want to dive into a dumpster and tear the trash bag apart They want to go through every single thing you see out there till they get down to the last little battery that they're going to recycle. And so we did a review on what happened in 2000. And again, there's 23,000 people there. And we announced this at the Jackson meeting with the public. And all we found, and maybe Dan was here at that time, they found one sleeping bag after 23,000 people had been on that meadow. That's the level of cleanup they'll do. We've been promised. So the trash obviously is a concern. We're concerned about future bear attractants, but they will be doing a complete and utter clearance of the site. There's a lot of other rehab. This is the trade circle you're asking about, how they barter. So everything, again, they put out there, there's signs out there, there's trails out there, there's just impact from where all the tents were. They'll be going through, pulling everything back, breaking down those leaven ovens, putting the rocks back out, crushing the lead back down, and just kind of raking the whole site to try to restore it. And this is an example of what, this was Camp Montana. This is what their fire pit looked like. So there's big fire pits that go out there that they made it into an M. So they, again, will pull that all back in, and they'll pull the vegetation back in and hopefully get it rehabbed. A lot of furniture, a lot of man-made things that need to be broken down. So all those sticks that were pulled together to build. This was the spirit spiral if you went in there. This is one of the kitchens. This is another kitchen. Those will all be broken back down and scattered across the course. And then we'll be dealing with the parking and any abandoned vehicles that are left out there. And we're hoping that we don't have very many, but that's kind of one of our goals, is to come back in, rehab those roads, and get any vehicles that are left out of there.
I can't believe all the campers in that one picture.
Oh, there was more than that. We have a place called, it was bus camp.
Oh.
There's 2 bus camps, lower bus camp and upper bus camp.
What do you do with the abandoned vehicles?
We tow them.
Okay. Do they, and if nobody claims them, what
They
happens?
go to salvage and the money goes back to pay for the towing.
Okay,
So they run them through to make sure that they're not stolen.
sure.
So
I know last time that some abandoned animals were a problem, abandoned animals. How about this year? Does it look
so
better?
far, there's not a problem. My understanding is in 2000 there was 47 dogs that are left. There aren't any yet, but again, there are still people out there. We have talked to the shelter, and we've also talked to the Humane Society out of Billings, so if there's additional shelters across the state to take any abandoned animals.
They left how many dogs?
In 2000, I wasn't here, but I was told there was 47 dogs that were left.
That's hideous.
Again, there was 23,000 people in 2000, there's 9,000 this year.
Actually, I think it was 38.
38, yeah, I just heard 47 in the news.
You know,
Dan might know.
at the public meeting here, that was concerned, and apparently at one time in West Virginia, at a gathering there, somebody had brought in a bitch dog with pups. They were sick. They had parvo, which is a highly contagious, well, we should get a dog shot for it. And people were expressing concern about that happening here until one of the ranchers realized that parvo was communicable to wolves. And then the ranchers all thought, hey, that'd be cool.
No, I heard that
There was-
a significant amount of people who ended up with parvo and dogs that were very sick also.
So there was one confirmed case of parvo with a puppy who died. There was no confirmation they'd actually made it out to the gathering, but it was a rainbow. So there was 4 sick dogs brought in, one that died of parvo, and it was a young pup. So for us that have been working out there, you know, we spray our boots when we leave the site with a bleach mixture. And then for those of us who have adult dogs that are vaccinated, we've been told not to worry about it.
The dog situation with the abandoned dogs, where it was very serious, because not all the dogs would come in. You know, I mean, if you're gonna be a mountain man and stuff, you gotta have a dog, and they let the dogs run wild, and some of the dogs just ran off. Some of the dogs could not be caught and brought to town. They were either shot, I don't know who shot them, and I don't claim any responsibility. But they, either that or the wolves got them, and they just started.
So currently, we don't have a problem. We still have folks out there, you know, we did put the forest ordinance that dogs need to be on a leash or in control, so voice control. My experience out there is that the majority of the dogs were in control. I mean, there's a large percentage of pit bull mixed blood out there, but Yeah, I don't think there's any other kind of breed out there, but they were in control of their dogs. There was 2 dog bites that I know of that happened that were treated at the colony, and I think one made it into the Dillon Hospital. So we may still be facing that, but hopefully by working with the Humane Society across the state, we can deal with it.
Can you talk about other meetings that happen in the country? You and I, a little bit about the Burning Man.
So there is, it's kind of a different crowd, but it's the Burning Man. It happens on BLM in Nevada. It's coming up pretty soon. BLM permits, they just upped the number. There's 60,000 allowed at Burning Man this year. It has a little different taste to it. It's
More drugs.
It's a little rougher, other than A-Camp. It started out kind of as a free expression of art. So there's a lot of art that happened. There's a lot of things that get built and burned down. There's a huge community that gets built of trading and those kind of things.
What do they charge?
They do charge. So there's a $300 permit to get into Burning Man, and it sells out every year.
Who gets that money?
BLM. So they manage it different than we do. But the purpose of Burning Man, they're not expounding First Amendment rights of gathering for free speech and religion. They have not fought the BLM on that. They fought them. They used to have 50,000. They just wanted to get it up to 60,000 this year. There's just 2 more pictures. I think that's it. So this is to kind of leave you in a rainbow mood. That's it. So, and this actually was the view leaving. Seriously, we did not Photoshop that. That was on the 6th when we left camp. So, questions or anything else for me?
Did it feel like, I guess I just wanted a good visual, when you were there, Patty, walking around, was it like being in the middle of thousands of people, or was it really spread out and it didn't feel congested, I guess?
So, yeah, 2 different feelings really. Through the main meadow is kept open for the gathering, for when they come together, do their peace circle. So when you're walking up that trail, you might see like 2 or 3 tents, and it's very spread out. As you get back into the trees, and you get into the established camps, the Forest Service has said how far from water the kitchens and the camps and the trains and everything else need to be. So they do get really concentrated, and you feel like, I felt like I was in fire camp, walking, primitive tool fire camp, walking through it. So it was very busy on the outskirts of it, but the main meadow is left open for the celebrations.
You said 2 groups are left back up there. About how many people is that?
I'm sorry, Ed?
You said about 2 groups are left up there cleaning
I
up for this
think,
next
I
month.
didn't hear the number
Yeah.
this morning. We were down to about 1,500, 2,000.
So that's the amount of people that will be cleaning up, or you don't know?
I don't know. I think there's a few that are just hanging out, that
Okay,
are still camped on the forest. The feeling is they're waiting for the Butte Folk Festival,
okay.
because that's coming up next week. So I go all the way home, and you have a big party coming up in Butte in 3 days. But there are, for the folks that are cleaning, there's probably a core group of a couple hundred that are just nonstop working on trash and recycling and dismantling and scattering and starting to pull stuff back together.
Is there a date by which they all have to be out?
When it's rehabbed. So we do have a 16-day camping limit on this forest. For the folks that came at the start of the gathering, which was the June 20th date, they've hit their 16 days. And I think the majority of those are gone. The ones that are in cleanup mode, they will get authorization to stay past that 16 days because they're doing the work cleaning up the mess. So that is kind of where the limits are. I've been told that it went through September in 2000. I don't have any knowledge of how long it'll stay, but that's to totally clean it up.
When you're working with an unorganized group like that, if you have some people, volunteers that you know that you can work with, hell, I let them stay for a couple months because you've got somebody to go to instead of not knowing who to go to see the agreement is reached. So I think it's important that those people get to stay because they may not be responsible, but at least they're people you can talk to.
Now, back to these court cases, you said individuals came through and challenged whether they could stay in something like this. So really, they've set precedents so anybody who had like a family reunion or anything like that could actually go do the same thing.
So part of the first court filings they did against the Forest Service was related to that. Our little rules, I can't remember what they were, it used to be like 20 people or or something.
25.
25. So they did set the new standard for the Forest Service. So now the family gatherings, the weddings and those kind of things, the number was up to 75. And our permitting process to get you to a permit at 75 people is very straightforward. You come in, you talk to me, you talk to the ranger, I have to give you that permit within 48 hours. I don't do any NEPA, I just give you that permit and I decide if you have to do something.
But they've proven you don't even need to do that.
So they've proven beyond that, that under the First Amendment, they have a right, a guaranteed right by the Constitution to gather, to express free speech, and to practice their religion. And they consider that Meadow Circle to be their religion. So your family reunion is probably not religion, but they've been able to prove that that is.
And because of that, the communities that are affected by this have no recourse at all, that other than to just deal with it and pay for it. Is that true? Basically?
Yeah, the other thing I'll tell you is that once they show up in mass, the Forest Service is incapable, even if we wanted to kick 10,000 people off the forest tomorrow, we're incapable of doing that. We don't have the ability to do that. We can't get rid of them. Yeah, I'm not saying we wanted to. I mean, let me phrase that because the recording's going here, but we can't do it.
Sure.
It's impossible.
Well, what's the fact versus fiction of all the stories we hear about the vandalism and the thievery and the shoplifting and the dumpster diving after they go into the market and pollute, for lack of a better term, all of the produce and stuff? Is that true or not?
The build-up and into the event, it is not true. There was one case, they peed on a tire at Comfort Inn. A vehicle that was parked in the parking lot, there was a tire peed on, the person was arrested. There was a window broken in Jackson at the Mercantile. The person was arrested, the Rainbow family paid for the window to be restored. There's been miscellaneous arrests for trespass, which is basically aggressive panhandling once they've been told to leave. Up until the 4th of July, there had been no case of people washing their hair and poking the meat and doing those kind of things in Dillon. It has changed as they've left. So if you talk to Chief Kraft, the story is much, and maybe Marty wants to speak to this, the story is much different over the last couple of days. There has been theft. There was 30 people at McDonald's in Safeway last night. It has changed with this last little contingent that's not leaving. But up to this point, all the other stuff was just rumors.
And did they actually steal all the fuel out of the fire trucks in Jackson?
No,
Okay.
no. So there was other questions.
I have one, I heard somewhere, and I can't remember where, that the group that is staying up there now are, as you might say, the worst looking, homeless type, redlocks that haven't been washed in 100 years and things like that. They're the rough looking people, is that true?
They look a lot different than I do, yes. So historically, there has been a long-term group that's been charged with the cleanup, rehab, and recycling. For the past 4 years, they have been training these 2 camps of Fat Kids and Goat Camp to take on that duty. They are a younger, rougher crowd than they've had in the past. So there are dreads, there are tats, there are piercings, but they're working. And the report we had this morning from resource advisors, they're making significant progress on cleaning the place up. But they're, yeah, they don't look like me.
Somebody else had a question.
Oh, you said there were 9 arrests from the fire service and county sheriff and the police at different figures. Do you have final figures for that?
I do not have any of the county or city
Okay.
or highway patrol information. I just know what Forest Service has done.
There was quite an article in the Butte paper about Verizon and the highway patrol and that were not able to use their computers and that. Were they able to get them up and going then?
So we brought in a temporary cell on wheels and actually had a temporary cell tower set up in Jackson. So no, they weren't, because when, so I get this right, when Verizon bought out whatever they did there on that tower in Jackson, AT&T has said, no, we won't offer Verizon anymore. So no longer can get cell service there, we have Verizon. But we have portable cell towers at home for communication. So there was some rough communication issues there.
You mentioned something about Jackson, the lodge, can you comment on that, how they did?
Well, someone asked me, did the lodge have to shut down and close their doors because of the impact? And the reality is the Montana Highway Patrol rented Jackson Lodge, and all their officers stayed at the lodge. So we actually couldn't even get rooms for our officers. The lodge was booked by the Highway Patrol. So it was good for the Highway Patrol because it cut down their driving time. They were where they needed to be. Our officers were actually driving out of Butte and adding that hour-and-a-half drive to their day each way, so.
It was also good for the lodge because they were being paid.
I would say that. And it was good because, you had a presence, so you had a law enforcement presence in town. And after the community meeting in Jackson, the Highway Patrol volunteered to make sure there was officers available and patrolling on a regular basis in Wisdom. So, they were there very helpful to the community.
How about business in town?
We talked about that this morning, about trying to do a survey to see where this all shook out. We had public information officers that went around and talked to folks, and that's how we can tell you that people didn't poke the meat at Safeway. I think most people just kind of wanted to get over, but if you figure there was almost 10,000 people there, and there was 200 that are bad ones, somebody was buying the gas, the ones that weren't panhandling down here, was buying the gas and buying the groceries and paying for things that are all out there. But we've talked about the need to just kind of talk to the businesses and find out if there was any economic benefit to offset, the economic impacts. And I don't have an answer yet.
If a lot of these people are homeless, how do they find out about these meetings? Because they don't have, or do they have computers that we don't know about?
Libraries.
I don't know. I just know that most people knew about it before we knew about it. We were in catch-up mode that week, the first week.
This is a really exciting program, but we're well after 1. Do we have any more quick questions for Patty?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very